Propositions have sometimes been referred to as the fourth branch of government. They give the average Californian the opportunity to directly weigh in on important public policy issues. And while frustration with the legislative process has resulted in a seemingly longer and longer list of propositions over the last 10 years, the number of propositions on this year's ballot is fewer than in the past. But while there are fewer propositions on the ballot than previous years, the topics are just as important. Issues relating to water, the state budget, healthcare, and crime, just to name a few. We'll get the analysis of this year's propositions with 5 experts from the Nonpartisan Legislative Analyst's Office. They are Anton Favorini-Sorba, Ryan Miller, Ross Brown, Drew Soderberg, and Anita Lee. The 2014 propositions: fewer doesn't mean less.
Additional funding for the Maddie Report made possible by a grant from Paramount Agricultural Companies, growing healthy food for you and your family.
From the California Channel at the state capitol, Valley PBS, and the Maddie Institute, it's the Maddie Report with Executive Director of the Maddie Institute, Mark Kepler.
Welcome. Our guest is California Legislative Analyst's Office expert on water issues, Anton Favorini-Sorba. Welcome back to the Maddie Report.
Hi, Mark. Thanks for having me.
So let's talk about Prop 1, the water bond. How much money of the $7.5 billion is going to be for water supplies, and what types of projects are included?
Yeah, so this is the largest portion of the bond. Maybe just to back up, just to kind of set the stage a little bit on California water supplies, probably most of your viewers know that we move water from north to south because most of the water is in the north, most of the population's in the south. We also have to store it throughout the year to get it to the places that we need it at the time we need it. We've built a system of canals and pipes to do that, but that's had an effect on the environment, and we have factors such as climate change. So there are some challenges with the water system. This bond has $4.2 billion for new water supplies. 2.7 of that, so most of it, is money for new storage.
Now, when you say new storage, that's not just dams, that's also underground storage as well?
Right. It could be improving our ability to store water as groundwater. The projects there would be ranked according to basically the return on investment for public dollars. So they're supposed to provide some public benefit, there would be a state agency that would select which projects get funded based on that return.
I want to talk about that in a moment, but I want to ask you a few other questions about Prop 1. One is the money set aside to protect and restore watersheds. How much money is set aside for that?
So there's $1.5 billion for protecting and restoring watersheds. That's split in a couple of different ways. Most of the funding would be set aside for specific parts of the state and kind of all around the state, but some of the money, about $500 million, would be to fulfill some of the state's environmental obligations or commitments that the state has agreed to fund.
So there are some specific projects that are designated that they would get funding under that?
Not exactly. There are a couple of options that might get funding under that, but the legislature would choose amongst those.
Okay, so the other issue is water quality. How much money for water quality? So
there's $1.4 billion for water quality, and that includes both surface water, kind of rivers and streams, but also groundwater quality. Over half of that money would be to clean up contaminated groundwater. Another $260 million would be for drinking water, and $260 for wastewater treatment improvements for people who can't afford it, and then $100 million for helping local agencies develop sustainable groundwater management plans related to the recent legislation.
$100 million here, $100 million there. It starts to add up. That's a big problem. I mean, groundwater contamination is a big problem, isn't it?
Yeah, throughout the state. I think particularly in the southern half of the state.
Right. There's also some money in there for flood protection.
That's right. This is the smallest portion. It's $395 million. Most of that goes to levees in the Delta.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. So that's where they're going to focus.
That's right. There'd be $100 million though that could go anywhere throughout the state.
Because if there was a breakdown in the levees in the Delta, that'd be catastrophic, wouldn't it?
Yeah, there are a variety of estimates, but you know, damages on the order of a couple $1 billion.
So maybe 400 or so million dollars to shore them up might not be a bad idea. Yeah. What about future projects? How are they going to be selected? You were mentioning that the California Water Commission
That's right.
is going to select them. How are they going to select? So you have $2.7 billion for water storage.
Right.
That's not earmarked specifically to projects like Temperance Flat or Site Stamp or something.
No, that's right. It could be spent throughout the state, and so there are a variety of public benefits that might be funded. So storage can provide benefits such as flood control, also water supply, and even environmental. So this commission would quantify those benefits, rank the projects that are asking for money, and then give them money without going through the legislative budget process.
So it's not going to be a simple cost-benefit analysis of this is the cheapest way to store water. There are going to be some other factors that they're consider as well. And who's on that commission?
There are a variety of appointees, mostly appointed by the governor, but a couple legislative appointees.
Okay, so I guess some folks might be concerned about the political aspects of the Water Commission, how they might rule.
Potentially, yeah. They're intended to have kind of balanced interests. Some people representing water interests, others environmental.
So I guess we'll see the fight going on, I'm sure, at the California Water Commission if this passes. What about the requirement for matching funds?
Yeah, so most of the funding, $5.7 billion, would require a 50% match by primarily by local agencies.
So that's about 3/4 of the money is going to require a match.
That's right.
Okay, last question is fiscal effects on state and local governments.
Yeah, so I think there are two major fiscal effects. One is we're borrowing a significant amount of money if this were to be approved, so we have to repay that. The payments on that would be, we estimate, $360 million a year for about 40 years.
And just to put that into context, we have about $110 billion state budget, so that's what, 0.3% of the state budget.
That's right.
But the $7 billion bond over that period of time would cost about $14 billion total after you pay it all. Like charging your credit card.
Yeah, exactly, or your mortgage.
Okay. Well, that's a. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, and then just to mention the other fiscal effect, it would be on local governments, and so with all this bond funding that might become available, we expect that some of that money would offset money that local governments would spend. Likely around a couple $100 million a year.
A couple $100 million.
Yeah, yeah, in there.
Okay, well, Anton, thank you very much. We've been talking about water, but now we're going to move our focus to the Rainy Day Fund. How much would Prop 2 address the state's endless fiscal roller coaster, as well as its long-term liabilities? That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddie Report. Welcome back. We're now going to talk about Prop 2, the Rainy Day Fund. Our guest is a California LAO Principal Fiscal and Policy Analyst on the state budget, Ryan Miller. Welcome to the Maddie Report.
Thank you for having us.
So, Ryan, we were talking about in the earlier segment, the state budget is about 100 to 110 billion. What are the biggest sources of revenue for the state budget, and what are their biggest expenditures?
Well, about 2/3 of the general fund revenues, the general fund is the state's main operating account. About 2/3 of their revenues come from the personal income tax, and almost all of the rest comes from the sales and use tax and the corporation tax. Now, out of that, about $110 billion, roughly half of it is spent on education, both for K through 12 and higher education, as well as community colleges, and most of the rest is spent on health and human services programs.
I think a lot of people are surprised about it. I think a lot of people think the money is spent on prisons. That's not the case.
It's a little less than 10% is actually spent on prisons.
And about 50% is spent on education, so quite a big difference.
That's right.
You know, California has been criticized for having a very volatile fiscal structure. What's the problem?
Well, we have a few different types of revenue that are volatile, but one that we've talked a lot about in recent years are capital gains. Revenues that we receive from capital gains taxes are taxed on mostly stocks, other types of property as well. But as the stock market is very unpredictable and goes up and down a great deal, so do our revenues from that tax. Part of the issue for the budget, as far as the state's elected leaders are concerned, is that when those revenues go up, and they can go up very fast, the state has tended to commit those resources to programs, and then when the stock market declines or we hit a recession, we no longer have that revenue base to support our programs. Yeah,
that's right.
So that's been a big problem for California's budget in recent years.
Well, didn't, though, the voters in 2004 pass Prop 58 to create a budget reserve? I think they called it a budget reserve account, the BSA, also known as the Rainy Day Fund. Why do we need Prop 2?
Well, some have criticized the BSA as being too easy to suspend. when the big financial crisis hit in 2008, the state suspended its deposits into the BSA for a number of years. This year, we actually put the standard 3% amount in, which is a little over $3 billion this year. But Prop 2 would make a variety of changes, not only to kind of the formula that we use to put money into the reserve, but also some of the rules governing how to take money out and how to put money in.
Well, let's talk about that for a second. So what is the change, the basic change in the amount that goes into the reserve? You said 3% under Prop 58. The new change would be what? So
it's 3% under current law. The governor can reduce that all the way down to 0 if he chooses. In this new version, for the next 15 years, it would be 0.75% of general fund revenues.
So less than 1%.
Less than 1%. But then in addition to that, when these capital gains revenues are very strong, a portion of that amount would go in. So in the voter guide analysis, we said that a minimum of about $800 million would be the kind of standard deposit. But then when capital gains revenues are good, they could be $2 billion or even more.
Okay. But it'd be a steady stream that's going into that account. Now, taking money out was one of the criticisms of Prop 58. Under this new Prop 2, they have something called a budget emergency. It's going to make it a little more difficult to take the money out of the BSA. Can you explain that process a little bit?
A budget emergency would be when the state is facing a natural disaster, such as the fires that we've had this summer. But in addition, another definition would be when the state can't maintain the amount of spending that it had in recent years, adjusted for inflation and population growth. The governor would declare a budget emergency, but then the legislature would also have to agree by passing a bill.
Okay, both of them. And then we also have something in there about the maximum size of the BSA. It was originally was $8 billion under Prop 58. What will it be under Prop 2?
Right now it is $8 billion. Under Prop 2 it would be about $10 billion. So it's a slight increase, yes.
Okay, and they also have something called state reserves for schools. Why are they setting that up?
Well,
what is that?
So the state has a formula that establishes a minimum amount of funding for K-12 and community college education. It's based largely on revenues, and since the state's revenues are quite volatile, so is education funding.
That's Prop 98.
That's Prop 98, yes. Okay.
So a lot of propositions here that influence state budget.
Yeah, propositions play a big role in the state budget. Yeah. But this account would tend to receive money less frequently than the standard BSA because some additional conditions would have to be met on the school side in order for money to go into that.
And it also set a maximum that local school districts could keep as a reserve, correct?
So a new state law that was passed this summer would go into effect if Proposition 2 passes. And when the state would put money into this new state reserve for schools, which we don't think would happen for a few years, but when that happens, the following year, school districts would have a cap on the amount of reserves they could keep at the local school district level.
So what's the fiscal impact of that on local school districts?
Well, it depends on how school districts would react to the new law. Some of them may spend down their reserves quickly. Some school districts have reserves far in excess of these new caps. So some of them might spend down to kind of get ready. Other school districts may wait and spend all at once when the new caps go into effect. But school districts could also petition county education officials to try to get kind of an exemption from these new requirements, and so some of them may seek that instead of spending down their reserves.
So another attempt at ballot budgeting, I guess. More to think about. Well, I want to thank you very much for being here. Up next, if you haven't heard enough about health care reform, you're in luck. There are 2 health care propositions on the November ballot. We'll be speaking about those in a moment. This is the Maddie Report. Welcome back. We're now joined by Ross Brown, an analyst on healthcare issues with the California Legislative Analyst's Office. Welcome to the Maddie Report, Ross.
Thanks for having me.
So, Prop 45, it would mandate that rates for individual and small group health insurance would have to be approved by the insurance commissioner. So let's provide some background first. Where do Californians get their health insurance?
Most people obtain their health insurance from their employer. They have job-based coverage. A lot of other people have government-sponsored insurance through either the Medicare program or the Medicaid program, which is Medi-Cal in California. And some people purchase their coverage directly from the health insurer, and that's known as individual market coverage. Now, as you mentioned, Prop 45 affects individual market and small group coverage. And small group coverage is defined as coverage for employers that have 50 or fewer employees. And individual and small group coverage represents about 15% of the total California population.
So that's all this would affect?
That's right.
Wow. Okay. Okay. So health insurance rates, how are they currently regulated, if they're regulated, and how would Prop 45 change that current process?
So California has a unique health insurance regulatory setup. There are two different health insurance regulators, the California Department of Insurance and the Department of Managed Healthcare, and they each regulate a different type of insurance. Now, currently, health insurance rates for the individual and small group markets, they are reviewed by the appropriate regulator, and the regulator makes a determination of whether or not they feel those proposed rates are reasonable or not, and they make that determination public, and they will try to encourage a health insurance company to change the rate if they feel that it is unreasonable, but they currently don't have any authority to approve or reject the proposed rates. Now, under Proposition 45, it would give the authority to the insurance commissioner, who heads the Department of Insurance, the authority to reject rate increases that he or she believes unreasonable.
So a simple way to say it is, right now it's voluntary, essentially, a recommendation, and it would change to mandatory.
It would move from simply review to the authority to approve.
Okay. You know, a lot of voters are under the impression that Covered California, which is California's healthcare exchange that was created under the Affordable Care Act, was going to negotiate rates. What effect would Prop 45 have on Covered California's ability to negotiate health insurance rates?
Covered California would still have the authority to negotiate rates if Prop 45 were to pass. However, those rates that are negotiated and agreed upon between Covered California and the health insurance company would then have to be additionally approved by the insurance commissioner after those are negotiated.
So these aren't mutually exclusive. The two can work, I guess it's going to be in sequence. So they first negotiate the rates, and then if they're acceptable by the insurance commissioner, then they're going to be
That's the idea, yes.
Okay. Proponents say that it would make health insurance similar to what's already happening with auto and homeowners insurance. Is that a fair analogy?
I think it's fair to say that the general process will be similar to what's currently used for auto and home insurance, and in fact, Proposition 45 uses a lot of the same language that's in Proposition 103, which was the voter initiative that gave the insurance commissioner the authority to approve home and auto rates. So process-wise, I think it'll be very similar. Now, it's difficult to say whether the effect on health insurance will be similar to whatever the effect that rate approval process had on home and auto insurance. Now, health insurance is a very different product. The rate structures are very different, so it's difficult to say whether the effects would be similar.
So we'll give that a maybe. Okay. What about the fiscal effects on state government and ratepayers?
It's very difficult to say what effect this will have on the actual rates themselves and what consumers will pay for rates. Now, on the fiscal side for state government, the most significant effects will be on the administrative costs. There will be some additional administrative costs for the Department of Insurance to review and approve the rates. There may possibly be some additional fiscal effects on Covered California or the Department of Managed Healthcare. All told, the likely costs are they probably won't exceed the low millions of dollars annually, and those costs will be funded by fees paid by health insurance companies.
What about retiree health that the state covers? Would it impact that as well?
Those aren't individual and small group market projects, so they're large groups, so they're not subject to the rate approval process that was established. Exactly.
All right, let's talk about Prop 46, and that would add drug and alcohol testing for doctors, as well as increase the amount for jury awards in medical negligence lawsuits from $250,000, which was established in 1975, to $1.1 million, and then adjust that amount going forward for inflation. And I guess they came up with that 1.1 by taking the $250,000 and then just using the rate of inflation to get to what it would be today, which would be 1.1 million. Is it true that doctors are currently not subject to drug and alcohol testing?
That's true. There's no current requirement that hospitals test doctors for drug and alcohol.
That's. I think the people would probably find that a little surprising. Most people really are focusing on that increase in the jury awards from $250,000 to $1.1 million, but that's for medical negligence lawsuits, to be clear. What impact do you think that's going to have on ratepayers and doctors?
It could have a wide variety of different effects, and you know, a lot of those effects are subject to a lot of uncertainty. But we identified two different broad categories of potential fiscal effects and cost increases. One is just the direct costs to doctors associated with resolving and paying out medical malpractice claims, and potentially to medical malpractice insurers having to pay higher amounts, and that would show up in medical malpractice premiums. The other effect is on a potential change in doctor behavior and the amounts and types of healthcare services that are provided.
To cover themselves, they'll provide more tests and things of that nature.
Right, yeah, they're at sort of a greater risk for higher medical malpractice claims, and in response to that greater risk, they could change their behavior in a way that either increases or decreases costs, but on net, it would likely increase costs, and altogether the two costs, both the direct costs for malpractice claims and sort of these changes in the types and amounts of healthcare services, would likely increase costs overall, and those costs would increase by a relatively small percentage
Yeah,
amount.
I think I had read between 1% or 0.5% total in healthcare costs. So actually, it's quite small.
A fraction of a percent to maybe a little bit more than 1%.
All right. Okay. I know we're going a little over, but I want to ask one quick question, and that is, what impact is this going to have, the increasing the maximum jury award amount, on state and local governments?
State and local governments spend a lot of money on healthcare services, tens of billions of dollars annually, and so those cost increases that we just talked about would be passed on to some state and local government purchasers. And given how much they spend on health insurance, even a small percentage change in those costs could result in an increase ranging from tens of millions of dollars to several hundred millions of dollars annually.
So it's where it's going to impact is the government, essentially.
Payers for healthcare services, which and governments are a large payer for healthcare services.
Well, thank you very much for being here. Up next, a discussion of crimes in casinos. That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddie Report. Welcome back. We're now joined by two more experts from the California Legislative Analyst's Office, Drew Soderberg and Anita Lee. Welcome to the Maddie Report.
Thanks.
So, Drew, let's start with you and talk about Prop 47. What specific crimes would be affected by Prop 47 if it passes? This is the idea of moving some felonies to misdemeanors. What are we talking about?
That's absolutely right. So Prop 47 would require misdemeanor sentences for possessing most illegal drugs for personal use. It would also generally reduce penalties for shoplifting, theft, forging or writing bad checks, and receiving stolen property when these crimes involve $950 or less. Now, one thing that is important to note is it would only reduce penalties for offenders who haven't previously been convicted of certain severe crimes, such as certain sex crimes, murder, and gun-related crimes.
They're not going to be covered.
That's absolutely
But
right.
if you haven't, then you would be.
That's correct. That's correct.
All right. So what impact is this going to have on state and county budgets?
Sure. So we estimate that Prop 47 could eventually result in net state savings in the low hundreds of millions of dollars annually. However, the measure does require that the state spend those on certain programs, such as mental health and drug abuse treatment, dropout prevention programs, and victim services. Now, when it comes to the counties, Prop 47 could result in net savings of several $100 million annually. And there wouldn't be any requirements on how the counties spend those dollars.
Okay, so there'd be some sounds like substantial savings, but you're also then, would these folks be still be monitored by the criminal justice system, or they're kicked out? I mean, they're released.
So basically what would happen is these offenders would be serving misdemeanor sentences. So they would have, to the extent they're in jail, they would have shorter jail terms, and to the extent they're on community supervision, their terms of supervision would tend to be shorter. So they would still be part of the criminal justice system. Just the nature of the sentence they would serve would be different.
And this may be an unfair question to ask you, but I'm just curious. You know, you see a lot of state prisoners going to county jails under realignment. What effect would this have any effect on that? Would you see more people going from state prisons to county jails?
So it absolutely would result in some offenders who would otherwise serve their term in state prisons serving their term in county jail. However, because it would also reduce the amount of time offenders who are already serving in jail spend in jail, the net effect of those two factors would result in a net reduction in the number of, it would basically free up jail beds. Okay. Now, there's a lot of counties that have overcrowding problems, so you might not see a reduction in the overall size of the jail population of a commensurate magnitude, because it might just result in some counties not releasing folks early like they had.
Right, but I guess you're seeing more people come in, but more people going out as well.
That's correct.
Okay, Anita, let's talk about Prop 48. That's the casino proposition, for a lack of a better way to say this. What can you tell us about Prop 48?
Sure. So if voters approve the proposition, two gaming compacts between the state and two Indian tribes, the North Fork Rancheria of Mono Indians and the Wiyot tribe, would go into effect. Also going into effect would be some local agreements with governmental agencies. Practically, what this means is that the North Fork tribe would be able to move forward with the construction and operation of a casino with up to 2,000 slot machines on land that was acquired near State Highway 99 in Madera County, approximately 38 miles from the tribe's reservation. At the same time, the Wiyot tribe tribe up in Humboldt County would be prohibited from gaming near their tribal lands near a wildlife refuge in exchange for a share of the revenues from the North Fork Casino.
Yeah, so they get a little money without having to have a casino there. So opponents say, listen, this is going to create a greater demand for government services. Proponents say, hey, but the city and county are going to make a lot more money. They're going to be well compensated. What do your projections show?
So the first thing I would say is that, you know, it's really difficult to predict what the impact of a casino will be before it opens. And so the compacts and various local agreements that North Fork has already entered into with some of the local governments makes an attempt to kind of anticipate those costs. So in our analysis, we estimated that the local governments would receive between 16 to 35 million in one-time payments and between 5 to 8.5 million in ongoing payments annually. Similarly, the state would receive revenues to offset increased costs, you know, for increased regulation, et cetera.
Yeah, there's some money there, but also the casino's going to be making, I think, hundreds of millions of dollars. So it's all balanced up. I guess people can read up on it and decide how they want to vote. I want to thank our guests, Anita Lee, Drew Soderberg, also Ryan Miller, and Anton Favorini-Sorba for being with us. If you want to stay current on state and local politics, you can sign up for our free e-newsletter, The Maddie Daily, by logging on to our website at maddieinstitute.org. And now, another perspective.
Unless you're an attorney steeped in the nuances of the Medical Injury Compensation Reform Act of 1975, do you have any clue how Proposition 46 would affect medical malpractice lawsuits? If you are not California Insurance Commissioner Dave Jones, do you understand how Proposition 45 would work? That's the one that would give insurance commissioners control over health insurance. Does Consumer Watchdog, which is promoting Propositions 45 and 46, really watch out for consumers, or its funders, whoever they might be? Does the Civil Justice Association, which signed the ballot argument against Proposition 46, truly want to provide civil justice for you and me, or for its corporate backers? This is a light initiative year. Only Propositions 45 and 46 are generating the sort of stratospheric spending that is the hallmark of the initiative system. Every once in a while, an initiative comes along that changes a law that needs changing. Mostly, they're written and promoted and paid for by advocates seeking to gore their rival advocates. Voters become pawns in their games. A century ago, Governor Hiram Johnson created California's version of direct democracy. On balance, we're better for having it than not. But no reform is written in stone. Governor Jerry Brown this year signed legislation by Senator Darrell Steinberg that will give initiative proponents an opportunity to amend their measures before they go on the ballots. The changes would take effect in 2016. Critics say this bill will make it harder to place initiatives on the ballot. Maybe so, but would that be such a bad thing? This is Dan Moraine for The Maddie Report.
The views expressed in the Maddie Report are those of the individuals participating in the program and do not necessarily reflect those of the Maddie Institute, the California Channel, Casey, or Valley PBS. If you'd like to share your thoughts about the points and opinions shared in the Maddie Report, visit our website at valleypbs.org/Maddie.
This is Mark Kepler for the Maddie Report. Thanks for joining us.